A warm welcome to all of you lovers of art and history who are gathered today to honor and to celebrate the renowned painter, illustrator, printmaker, Edward Hopper. Born in Nyack, New York, Hopper moved to this 3 Washington Square North building 100 years ago. In 1913, at the age of 31, he lived here for the rest of his life until his death at nearly 85 in 1967. The studio, which he shared with his wife, Jo Nivson, is located in one of these 3 townhouses referred to as the Row, and now the home of New York University's School of Social Work. It is in this preserved studio where he created many of his masterworks. And for those of you who are not aware, special visits can be arranged by appointment only. Hopper is perhaps most famous for his painting Nighthawks and other intensely evocative interior scenes. He was also a brilliant landscapist whose watercolors dealt with what the artist called nature's phenomena, the light and color of Cape Cod, where he summered for nearly 40 years. I'm Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, the chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center and the New York City Landmarks 50 Advisory Alliance, New York City's newest civic group, a growing committee of 97 distinguished and dedicated organizations and individuals committed to informing the public about the past, present, and future of preservation in our city. Welcome to all of you. Our thanks go to the Historic Districts Council, and especially to Frampton Tolbert, where are you, Frampton, and Simeon, who assisted with the approvals and installation. Thank you also to New York University, Lynn Brown, Senior Vice President of University Relations, and the Dean of the School of Social Work, Lynn Videka, who helped to facilitate this commemoration. And now to begin our wonderful program with musical accompaniment and remarks by distinguished authorities on the life and accomplishments of Edward Hopper. We will begin with the eminent poet, Grace Schulman, recipient of the Delmore Schwartz Memorial Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the New York University Distinguished Alumni Award, and a fellowship from the New York State Council on the Arts. She is a distinguished professor of English at Baruch College of CUNY, and her 7th collection of poems, why don't you hold it up, Grace? Without Acclaim, was published just yesterday by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Grace will read a poem on the influence of Hopper on her poetry.
My poem is called American Solitude, with an epigraph from Marianne Moore. The cure for loneliness is solitude. It's very good advice. Hopper never painted this, but here on a snaky path, his vision lingers. 3 white tombs, robots with glassed-in faces, and meters for eyes, grim mouths, flat noses, lean forward on a platform like strangers with identical frowns scanning a blur far off that might be their train. Gas tanks, broken for decades, face Parsons Smithy, planked shut now. Both relics must stay. The pumps have roots in gas pools, and the smithy stores memories of hammers forging sods to cut spartina grass for dry salt hay. The tanks have the remove of local clambers who sink buckets and stand never in pairs, but one and one and one, blank-eyed, alone, more serene than lonely. Today, a woman rakes in the shallows, then bends to receive last rays in shimmering water, her long shadow knifing the bay. She slides into her truck to watch the sky flame over sand flats, a hawk's wind arabesque, an island risen brown Atlantis at low tide. She probes the shoreline and beyond grassy dunes for where the land might slope off into night. Hers is no common emptiness, but a vaster silence filled with terns cries, an abundant solitude. Nearby, the 3 dry gas pumps, worn survivors of clam-digging generations, are luminous and have an exile's grandeur that says, in perfect solitude, there's fire. One day I approached the vessels and wanted to drive on, the road ablaze with dogwood in full bloom. But the contraptions outdazzled the road's white, even outshone a bleached shirt flapping alone on a laundry line, arms pointed down. High noon, 3 urns, ironic in their outcast dignity, as though, like some pine chests, they might be prized in disuse. Cast, raised, spun, leaf-covered numbers, clanked, then wheezed and stopped again. Shadows cut the road before I drove off into the dark woods. I should have mentioned this is a scene that Hopper did not paint. It's in East Hampton by the Springs General Store, if you know the area. The 3 dry gas pumps. I always thought he should have painted it, but he didn't. But I'd like to read one more short poem by John Hollander, which has to do with a painting that Hopper did, something Hopper did paint, and it's Edward Hopper's 7 a.m., 1948. The morning seems to have no light to spare for these close, silent, neighboring dark trees, but too much brightness in low-lying glare for middling truths, such as whose premises these are, and why just here, and what we might expect to make of a shop window shelf displaying last year's styles of dark and light. Here at this moment, morning is most itself. Before the geometric shadows, more substantial almost than what casts them, pale into whatever later life will be. What happens here? What is the sort of store whose windows frame such generality? Meaning is up for grabs, but not for sale.
Perhaps that is why he took off for months on end to drive and drive and drive, perhaps in search of the vision that is here 100 years later. Our next speaker is Gail Levin, the distinguished professor of art history at Baruch College and the Graduate Center of CUNY. She is the recipient of numerous awards, a curator who specializes in art of the 20th and 21st centuries. Her research includes women artists, Jewish artists, Chinese emigre artists, and contemporary art of the United States, Europe, and Japan, as well as American Studies and Cinema. A foremost authority on the work of Edward Hopper, she is the author of numerous books and articles about the artist, including his catalog raisonné, a poetry anthology tribute to Edward Hopper, and Edward Hopper, The Complete Prince. Gail Levin.
I want to thank Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel for achieving this moment of the plaque on the Edward Hopper House, which I've long dreamed of. And what a wonderful occasion to have Grace Schulman read poetry based on Hopper, and Adam Weinberg here from the Whitney and his curator Carter Foster, where they have the Hopper drawing exhibition on right now. It's really a Hopper moment in New York, as I shall indicate further.
Excuse me, I forgot to mention your forthcoming book.
Barbaralee, you want to, well,
Yes.
She forgot to mention my forthcoming book, which I will just...
Which is a sin for any author, and let alone an author doing it to another author.
It's not only a book, but it's an exhibition at 2 CUNY galleries opening November 12th and 13th, and it's of a friend of Edward Hopper, a woman friend, not a girlfriend, but a colleague, Teresa Bernstein, and I first read about them in the unpublished their friendship in the unpublished diaries of Walter Tittle, where the two of them were, three of them, Edward Hopper, Walter Tittle, Teresa Bernstein, and other colleagues, were hanging a show, a non-juried show at the McDowell Club on West 55th Street. And when I heard in the early 80s that she was having a show at the New York Historical Society, Hopper had been dead nearly 2 decades, and I was quite astounded that she was still alive. And I gingerly got to know her because Lee Krasner died around that time, and I didn't want to lose another woman artist friend, but Teresa, who was then in her early 90s, lived on till 2 weeks short of her 112th birthday, not dying till 2002. So I hope you'll come and see that show at the James Gallery at the Graduate Center of CUNY on 34th Street and the Baruch College Michigan Gallery on 22nd Street.
Now tell us all about Edward Hopper.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the ad. At his death in 1967, just before his 85th birthday, Edward Hopper was beginning to be recognized as the grandfather of the pop art movement. Critics viewed him as the precursor to such talents as Warhol and Oldenburg. Hopper had been unyielding in his embrace of realism. He had dismissed the fashion for abstract expressionism and insisted that realism would, quote, reassert itself, end quote. Today, his view is affirmed by the popular preference for representation over abstraction. Moreover, Hopper's most iconic image, Nighthawks of 1942, remains the subject of admiration and of affectionate parody. His fans across the globe have appropriated his Greenwich Village eatery in wartime New York. They have populated his lonely diner with such subjects as The Simpsons, Santa and his reindeer, and what seems to be an infinite number of other parodies made from New York to Beijing. Poets, too, as we have just heard, have responded to Hopper's indelible images that seem to come from life even as they shape our view of it. The performing arts have all paid homage to Hopper's eye. His work has inspired operas, symphonies, ballets, and plays. As viewers imagine dramas, his pictures suggest. Novels in a variety of languages feature Hopper's images in their stories. Born in Nyack, New York in 1882, Hopper made his way to New York City in order to study painting at the New York School of Art. He no longer existing, but they played baseball against the Art Students League. He also benefited from studying the old masters at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and attending the theater. Hopper's canvas, House by the Railroad of 1925, would become the first painting by any artist to enter the permanent collection of the new Museum of Modern Art, just months after its founding in 1929. It was the modern where Hopper found a champion in the curator Alfred H. Barr Jr., who organized Hopper's first retrospective exhibition in 1933. They also put him in a very famous show of their first year called 19 Living Americans. The trustees couldn't agree on 15, that's why 19. Hopper was there. Hopper moved to number 3 Washington Square North in 1913, but he was then in a top-floor studio in the back overlooking the Mews. He and his wife Jo acquired additional studio space overlooking the square only in 1932, and that soon became the subject of a painting by each of them. Edward Hopper had shown little sign of rising to such eminence when he and Josephine Nivison joined forces in 1924. Invited in 1923 to show her watercolors in a major show at the Brooklyn Museum, she managed to convince the organizers to include the work of her friend, Edward Hopper. His watercolor won the prize of being purchased for the museum, where it is still treasured. His career as a painter was finally launched at the age of 41, when they bought that painting. The couple married the next summer and spent their honeymoon painting in Gloucester, Massachusetts. In Jo, Edward acquired not only a fellow painter, but a trained actress who became his only model. Nivison's practice of painting a landscape in order to provoke her husband into breaking through his painter's block benefited him again and again during 43 years of marriage. Most of those canvases of Jo's, however, were discarded and have vanished. Yet 4 paintings were given to NYU, which has kept them here in the studio, top floor, where the couple lived for so many years. Historians must also be thankful to the NYU dean at the time of the School of Social Work, who, valuing Edward's work, prevailed upon the university to preserve the space of the Hopper studios. And so today, the space contains the press on which Hopper printed his etchings, hung his hat, the easel that he built himself, the coal stove that heated the space, and the tiny kitchenette that attests to the couple's preference for eating out in some of the very spaces that inspired his canvases, from chop suey to tables for ladies. Edward remarked of artists in general, 90% of them are forgotten 10 minutes after they're dead. Despite his cynicism, Hopper's work has won an international reputation, an especially notable accomplishment for an American artist of his generation, which was not yet recognized outside of the United States. Hopper's recurrent visual ironies on the manifestations of modern life suggest his highly ambivalent attitude toward the changes occurring in 20th century society. While he wholly rejected skyscrapers, airplanes, jazz, abstract art, and the new independence for women, he enjoyed the freedom and convenience of traveling in his own automobile and the escape of going to the cinema. Yet it is his profound alienation from contemporary life that makes his art so characteristic of modernity itself. And it is Hopper's imagination that transforms the banalities of daily life into metaphors rich in ironical resonance that draws us to look and to reflect again and again. Thank you.
And now Lynn Videka, the Dean of NYU's Silver School of Social Work since 2009. She came to NYU from SUNY Albany, where as an innovator in education, she helped to establish dual degree programs in social work and sociology. She served as Distinguished Service Professor, was the Dean of the School of Social Work, and Vice President for Research. A widely published author, she was a Fulbright Fellow to Bulgaria and a visiting scholar at Hallym University in Chuncheon, South Korea. Thank you for helping us accomplish, after 2.5 years, the installation of this cultural medallion today. Lynn Videka.
Thank you so much, Barbaralee. To me, Washington Square North, known today as the Ruth Lewis Farkas House, is the home of the NYU Silver School of Social Work, as well as the beautiful and preserved Hopper Studio, Edward Hopper Studio. As a School of Social Work, our mission is to prepare social work practitioners and scholars to carry out the two purposes of our profession. One, to improve and enhance the well-being of people, all people, and two, to advance social justice in our society. As social workers, we're very proud of this mission, and we think it is a noble mission to complement the nobility of the art that was created in this home, in this house. We are most fortunate that our school is located in 1, 2, and 3 Washington Square North, these beautiful and historic buildings, and we're very grateful to the school's patrons. This building is named after one of them, who made their preservation and restoration possible. Without the support of major donors, we would have had a much lower chance of ever preserving this wonderful studio of Edward Hopper. NYU and the Silver School of Social Work are both very supportive of historic buildings, the history of our neighborhood, and I want to close by underscoring our commitment, our promise to be good stewards of this invaluable historic place, and to shepherd these important buildings of artistic and cultural significance. It's a real honor to be here today and to be the current residents of this building. Thank you, Barbaralee.
And thank you. Thank you, Jean Videcka, and thank you for affirming your strong commitment to historic preservation and historic preservation at NYU. I hope we don't have to call upon you to testify. And now, incidentally, have your students ever examined the social implications of Hopper's work? Has it ever been the subject of discourse or lecture here?
I don't think we've ever had such a course, but now that we've met Professor Levin, I think we will be collaborating and making that possible.
More to follow.
Yes.
Adam Weinberg,
Not to
Mr.
mention
Cotter.
our wonderful friends at the Whitney, absolutely, who we are already collaborating with, as you'll hear.
Wonderful. In fact, he will tell you about it now. The Alice Pratt Brown director of the Whitney Museum of American Art, Adam Weinberg, is also a renowned curator of dozens of exhibitions and the author of numerous articles, catalogs, and essays on contemporary and modern art. The Whitney Museum, by the way, was around the corner on 8th Street when Hopper lived here. So it is little surprise that they had such interest in their bequest to the Whitney. Adam is now overseeing the construction of the new Whitney Museum, a hoped-for landmark of tomorrow, situated on the High Line, next to the High Line, designed by Renzo Piano, and scheduled to open in the Meatpacking District in the spring of 2015. In 1970, Hopper's widow, Josephine Nebeson, left his estate to the Whitney in recognition of the museum's long support of Hopper. The bequest included more than 2,000 paintings, watercolors, and drawings. Maybe you could have a small exhibition right here, and that would be open to the public more frequently.
Thank you, Barbaralee. Thank you.
Adam Weinberg is capable of everything.
Please tell my wife that I'm capable of everything. She thinks I'm incapable of anything.
That's too much
Thank
of a
you, Bob.
cliche. I'm coming to her defense.
Absolutely. Anyway, I want to thank you, Barbaralee. When I got word that you were doing the cultural medallion, I thought, well, for Hopper, I really should be there. But when I heard that it was Barbaralee heading it up, I knew that I had to be there. But you know, Barbara's been so generous in her remarks about everybody else, and I just want to say to commend you, Barbara, for your incredible efforts to protect all of the cultural resources in the city and architectural landmarks. You've accomplished extraordinary things over the years.
In collaboration.
I know, with many, but you are an icon as well. And truly, thank you. This wouldn't be happening, so thank you.
Thank you.
I'm also very honored to speak here today with Gail Levin, very distinguished scholar and somebody I've known for many years and whose work I've relied on, and generations of scholars will rely on for knowledge of Hopper's work. And it's great to be here. And Grace Schulman, I don't know if Grace is still here, but Grace is truly a great icon of American poetry. And there was something wonderful about seeing the poet standing here behind the simple microphone in her sandals. It felt like the village that I knew when I grew up in. Excellent. That's a good reason. Anyway.
She had a class.
She had a class. That's why she isn't here. But I also want to thank the Dean for her great collaboration, in which I'll share a word about. In 1913, 100 years ago, Edward Hopper moved to this building on Washington Square, where he proceeded to live and work for the rest of his life. Hopper painted here throughout almost his entire career. He began on the top floor of 3 Washington Square North, in the back, as Gail pointed out, from 1913 until 1932, before taking over a larger room in the front of the building overlooking the square. And I, too, wonder what it looked like at that time. This front room remained his studio from 1932 until the end of his life. Edward and Joe lived here simply and frugally. I'm not so sure when it was fully furnished that it was actually that much fuller than it is even today. Hopper worked on the easels he's built for himself, one of which we have so graciously been able to borrow from NYU School of Social Work for our current Hopper exhibition curated by Carter Foster, my colleague, who is standing here today. And I hope that all of you might have a chance to see the Hopper drawing show that is up now. And one of the most actually touching and amazing moments for me is when we put early Sunday morning the great Whitney painting on the easel without the frame, naked as it were. I mean, it really felt like a naked painting, that it matched up exactly with the size of the easel itself. It was almost like a separated at birth kind of situation. So it's a really special thing to see. As Barbaralee mentioned, the Whitney Museum started, actually, it was the Whitney Studio Club, originally started here. That was the forerunner of the Whitney Museum, which was started by our founder, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, as a place to champion American art and artists at a time when few people took American art seriously. And as Gail pointed out today, there are actually still only so many pre-war American artists who are really given that kind of level of reputation abroad, outside of Edward Hopper and a few others, and O'Keeffe and Calder. And as Barbaralee mentioned, we're really pretty pleased and proud because actually the Whitney is going to be a mere 10, 12 blocks from here. So we see it as not, in a way, the new Whitney, but it's a return. It's coming back to our roots and where we started. Hopper was included in the first Whitney Biennial in 1932 and in more than 30 annual and biennial exhibitions throughout his lifetime. And during his lifetime, we organized 2 major retrospectives, one in 1950 and one in 1964, and a number of others subsequently. In 1970, we received more than 2,500 drawings, paintings, watercolors, prints, illustrations that were bequeathed by Joe Hopper. And this has become a foundation for research for Edward Hopper. You can't understand Edward Hopper without coming to the Whitney Museum, we're very happy to say. And I think actually Hopper's name and the Whitney name have almost become synonymous. Hopper is frequently thought of as the iconic American artist. And this may be true, but I think he's also the quintessential New York artist. Few artists have captured the qualities of the city, the light, the architecture, the bridges, the spaces, both interior and exterior, that particular air of suspense, longing, and expectation the way we know that Hopper did. How appropriate it is today that the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center has chosen to place a medal in Hopper's honor, where he created so many masterpieces in this neighborhood and the city that was most important to him and his work. And again, I would like to applaud Barbaralee and the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center for choosing to commemorate Hopper in this way, for their great sensitivity in selecting locations throughout the city, for placing these medallions in many places that you can't go into, but you have to imagine what is behind those walls.
Very few you can.
And which is wonderful. And it adds so much to the life of what goes on not only behind, but the life of the streets of New York. And I'm sure many of you have had the experience that I've had in walking the city, discovering these plaques, which remind us not only of the city's past and present, but of the history that's being made today. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Barbaralee, and thank you to the Historic Landmarks.
It is a perfect segue for me to invite each and all of you who are here to nominate appropriate, distinguished, verifiable places where these remarkable New Yorkers lived and worked and played and created. So just send your nominations to the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center. Before we dedicate the medallion, we will have read to us an excerpt of a poem sent on and written by Joyce Carol Oates. She would have attended, but was unable to do so. So we are reading the poem in her absence. It is entitled Edward Hopper's 11 a.m. 1926. It will be read by Deborah Bershad, the project director of New York City Landmarks 50.
Thank you, Barbaralee. Edward Hopper's 11 a.m. 1926 by Joyce Carol Oates. She's naked, yet wearing shoes. Wants to think nude and happy in her body, though it's a fleshy, aging body. And her posture in the chair, leaning forward, arms on knees, staring out the window, makes her belly bulge. But what the hell? What the hell? He isn't here. Lived in this damn drab apartment at 3rd Avenue, 23rd Street, Manhattan. How many damn years? Has to be at least 15. Moved to the city from Hackensack, needing to breathe. She'd never looked back. Sure, they called her selfish, cruel. What the hell, the use they'd have made of her? She'd be sucked dry like bone marrow. First job was file clerk at Trinity Trust. Wasted 3 years of her young life waiting for R.B. to leave his wife, and wouldn't you think a smart girl like her would know better? Second job, also file clerk, but then she'd been promoted to Mr. Castle's secretarial staff at Lyman Typewriters. The least the old bastard could do for her, and she'd have done a lot better except for fat-faced Stella Checky. Third job, Tevick Realtors and Insurance, and she's Mr. Tevick's private secretary. What would I do without you, my dear one? As long as Tevick pays her decent, and he doesn't let her down like last Christmas she wanted to die. This damn room she hates, dim-lit like a region of the soul into which light doesn't penetrate. Soft, shabby old furniture and sagging mattress like those bodies in dreams we feel but don't see. But she keeps her bed made every goddamn day, visitors or not. He doesn't like disorder. He told her how he learned to make a proper bed in the U.S. Army in 1917. The trick is, he says, you make the bed as soon as you get up. Detaches himself from her as soon as it's over. Sticky skin, hairy legs, patches of scratchy hair on his shoulders, chest, belly. She'd like him to hold her and they could drift into sleep together, but this rarely happens. Crazy wanting her, then abruptly it's over. He's inside his head and she's inside hers. Now this morning she's thinking, goddamn bastard, this has to be the last time. Waiting for him to call to explain why he hadn't come last night. And there's a chance he might come before calling, which he's done more than once. Couldn't keep away. God, I'm crazy for you. She's thinking she will give the bastard 10 more minutes. She's Joe Hopper, with her plain, redhead's face stretched on this fleshy female's face. And he's the artist, but also the lover. And last week he'd come to take her out to Delmonico's, but in this dim-lit room they'd made love in her bed and never got out until too late, and she'd overheard him on the phone explaining. There's the sound of a man's voice explaining to a wife that is so callow, so craven, she's sick with contempt for calling. Yet he says he's left his family, he loves her. runs his hand over her body like a blind man needs to see. And the radiance in his face that's pitted and scarred, he needs her in the way a starving man needs food. Die without you, don't leave me. He told her it wasn't what she thought, it wasn't his family that kept him from loving her all he could, but his life. He'd never told anyone about the war in the infantry in France, what crept like paralysis through him. Things that had happened to him and things that he'd witnessed and things that he'd perpetrated himself with his own hands. And she'd taken his hands and kissed them and brought them against her breasts that were aching like the breasts of a young mother ravenous to give suck and sustenance. And she said, no, that is your old life. I am the new life. She will give her new life 5 more minutes.
There are approximately 100 cultural medallions throughout New York City, and it is now our pleasure to ask Simeon Bankoff and Frampton Tolbert to come unveil the plaque and to read the text. Will you please come forward?
Okay, this says Edward Hopper, July 22nd, 1882 to May 15th, 1967, 3 Washington Square North, Manhattan. A printmaker, illustrator, and prominent watercolorist, Hopper is renowned for his oil paintings, which focus on everyday life, whose focus on everyday life explores the visualization of human isolation, regret, and boredom. His most famous painting, Nighthawks, 1942, shows customers at a brightly lit all-night diner inspired by a local village restaurant. Many of Hopper's canvases focus on solitary figures or couples in their everyday environments. His rural landscapes and marine paintings are inspired by the area around Truro, Massachusetts, where he summered for nearly 40 years. Hopper developed a consistent style of modern painting that remained realist, despite the dominance of abstraction in art during much of his life. Though he had no formal students, many artists, including de Kooning and Rothko, had cited him as an influence. From 1913 until his death, Edward Hopper shared the studio with his wife, Jo, who was also a painter, his only model, and his muse. Historic Landmarks Preservation Center.
And please don't forget not only to send your nominations, but our next event will be at 25 Broad Street to honor Albert Bard on the 23rd of September at 3 p.m. Albert Bard, a distinguished lawyer and civic activist, worked for many years to promulgate the law that became the basis of the New York City Landmarks Law. Thank you all for coming. A special thanks to all the participants. It was really sweet.